Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. I'm Travis Shaddix. Thank you for coming this morning. Thank you for listening later if you're watching it on the recording. We had a great conversation yesterday with Dr. Soldat. Guy's a machine. Publications galore, grad students. He's the much more attractive and much more intelligent and knowledgeable version of me. If turfgrass soil science was a sport, I would be like in Pee Wee League, and Dr. Soldat's in the major leagues. So he does a lot of good work. I was only in academia for 6 years as a professor for 6 years. Anybody can do that. I mean, it's not that difficult. What's difficult is to do it for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. That's difficult. And he's been there for a while, as have many other professors. I appreciate him coming on yesterday. Hopefully that's the first of many. That paper we did yesterday was a nice little paper. He happens to have a lot more papers that are probably a little bit more well-known than the paper we did yesterday. And I'm sure we'll get to those as the topic comes around for soil testing or phosphorus or whatever the case might be. He has a lot of papers on phosphorus, particularly when it comes to environmental fate. He has quite a few. I think he's a co-author on the review paper as well. So he might have actually even written that paper. I think he's the first author on that review phosphorus paper. So I hope to have him back. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. So we'll see how the channel progresses, and seems like we're getting a few more people on here recently. So I certainly appreciate everybody that comes on and is willing to come on and talk about their papers. On that note, if anybody is interested in coming on and just participating with me and giving me your insight as I go through these papers, if you're a lawn care operator or a business owner or a homeowner or whatever you might be interesting to see as I go through a paper. If you have questions, you could just ask while I'm here. So if you're ever interested in that, reach out and contact me. Maybe we can make that happen. This week, so I'm going to go over a paper today. Again, we're working. So the topics again, we're in, October 17th, 2023. We're still going through cool season fall fertility. I honestly, I'm doing 4 papers a week, and I might be here for the next year just doing cool season fertility. There's so many papers, but at some point I'll get to another topic. But for now, I think it's of interest, and it's pertinent to what the time frame we're in now. We're going to go over another paper today on cool season fertility. The short and skinny of all these papers are, if one paper says this and another paper says something similar and another paper says something similar, they start to build on themselves. And the take-home message of a lot of these papers is that fall fertility with soluble fertilizers is very likely going to result in a color increase and a growth increase if applied early in the fall. It's probably not going to result in a growth increase if applied late in the fall, but you might have a color increase if applied late in the fall. Those late fall treatments that don't respond in terms of growth generally will respond in terms of growth and color more in the spring than the early fall treatments. But the whole time it's sitting out there, you have a lot of risk of offsite movement and potential, as Dr. Soldat mentioned yesterday, the customer potentially leaving you. You paid for that fertilizer and you put it out, and next thing you know, the customer leaves and goes somewhere else, hires somebody else, and you paid for that nitrogen that the next guy's getting for free. So there's all sorts of issues involved with applying nutrients that are not taken up by the plant, and sit there for months without being taken up, and maybe they'll eventually be taken up when you could just apply it in the spring. Essentially, all these papers are saying the same thing. Early fall soluble nitrogen treatments, as it gets colder and colder, those rates, like right now it's October 17th, you shouldn't be applying a pound of nitrogen, soluble nitrogen in Lexington. Maybe a half a pound or a quarter pound is going to get you what you need. You don't need to apply any more than that. In the spring, you can go out and apply your half a pound or maybe as much as a pound in the spring if you wanted to on these fescues in Lexington might be okay. That's the take-home message of all these. And this paper today is generally going to say the same thing. The paper today is a little bit disjointed. I'm going to try my best to get through here without confusing everybody, only because there's two separate studies in this project, in this paper today, and it's a little bit, I don't know, it's just a little bit challenging to kind of keep track of what happened when and what study. So I'll do my best to get through it and try to, get the bullet points out for you guys. So I see people in the chat, Gray and Turf Nerd Lawn Care. I wish I knew your real names. I'd refer to your real name, but that's okay if you don't want to say what your real name is. Western Mass Turf Lush, going to the GIE. Yeah, I can't go to the GIE this year. Like I said, I haven't been in years, but there was some request maybe to come down and join some of the stuff going on at the GIE. But as most extremely lucky men are, I happen to be married to someone who's unbelievably more successful and knowledgeable, intelligent than I am. So I have to kind of work around her schedule, which I'm happy to do. And she's not available right now. So it means I'm at home taking care of the kids, and I'm on dad duty 24/7. I don't, until the end of the week. So I can't leave. So I'm not going to the GIE, but maybe there'll be other times we can cross paths. Okay. Let's get started. The title of today's paper is The Effects of Various Nitrogen Sources, Timing and Rates on Quality and Growth of Cool Season Turf Grasses. So the title encompasses a lot of what we've been going over the last week, all in one paper. So we're going to be looking at one study that had different nitrogen sources, one study that had the same nitrogen sources, and they did it at a whole slew of different timings and rates and all. It's rather I don't want to say complex. It sounds sort of negative. It's just a lot going on here. So let's see if we can get through it. This study was conducted in 1973 by Ledeboer, I guess I'm saying that name right, and Skogley. I think this was published in Agronomy Journal. Yeah, Agronomy Journal in 1973. So this, you'll see some white dot sections as you have in other publications that I go over if you're unfamiliar with what I've been doing. These white dot sections are simply to kind of keep me on track and to keep me from meandering through all the stuff and kind of just hit the highlight points. If you want the entire article, I encourage you to go to the agronomy.org or crops.org or soils.org. Any of those three will get you to the same spot, more or less. And you can search Agronomy Journal and pull up this article. If you're a member, you can download all you want. If you're not a member, then you can read the abstract, and you might want to consider getting a membership. Now, I looked at the membership the other day. I have a membership to all three, but the main reason I am a member is to get access to the articles. And I think you can actually just be a member of one society instead of all three for like around $100, I think. And then you can have access to the journals for around, I want to say it was around another $100 for the electronic access. I can't remember now, but I remember thinking that I'm probably paying a lot more than I need to for the use that I want to get out of the membership, which is just the journal articles. So, and my membership's coming due. I think it's either this month or next month. So I'll probably adjust my membership because I don't vote. I don't sit on any committees anymore. I was never on the boards or anything like that. So I just want access to the articles. And if you're similar to me, then there might be a way you can do that for around $200 a year or something like that. I don't want to misquote anything or missay anything, but it seems like that was the number I came up with yesterday when I was looking up the different membership things. Okay. So what we've been doing, we're going through 1930s, 1940s, 1960s. Now we're in the 1970s, and we're still looking at the effect of applying nitrogen in the fall on what happens to the turf. Okay. This particular study, the objective was, the studies reported here were conducted to determine if fall and late fall nitrogen applications to mixed cool season turf grasses could be used successfully from the standpoint of producing more even top growth and turf color throughout the growing season. So that is really what the majority of papers up to the 70s, really even later, looked at, was the effect of turf growth and color. They're not necessarily considering the cost of the applications in terms of actual real cost to you, the purchaser, the consumer, or the environmental costs by applying these nutrients in the late fall. They're simply looking at the turfgrass response. What happens? A 10-6-4 grade fertilizer was used on several grasses. That'll be in one study. While ammonium nitrate and urea formaldehyde were compared for their effectiveness on Kentucky bluegrass in a different study. Okay, they prolonged green foliage in the fall and early greening spring. So we're gonna see a study that looks at a complete fertilizer, 10-6-4, applied to several turf grasses, and they applied them at different times. And then we're going to look at a separate study that has what happens between urea formaldehyde and ammonium nitrate in terms of their effectiveness and turf response. Okay. The materials and methods are, again, a little bit disconnected, but I'm going to fill in the gaps as best I can where necessary. I don't see anywhere in the materials and methods where it says it was conducted, but I know it was conducted in Rhode Island. The conclusions state that it was under Rhode Island conditions. So we're in the Northeast United States. Differential fertilizer treatments were begun in September of 1965 and continued for one full year before data were recorded. So they're applying nitrogen and they're keeping the turf grass, well established or well groomed, which is actually what I'm doing now. I have a study that I'm doing in collaboration with a professor somewhere else. And right now I'm just applying a little bit of nitrogen to kind of get the grass nice and established and uniform. And that's what they did. Replicated plots, don't worry about the size, were treated with, a 10, 2.6, 3.3, which is, in the scientific world, we can't use the oxide equivalent, which is what we use standard on our labels and fertilizers in the United States. We'll say a 10, 10, 10, but in scientific literature, that the second and the third 10 are oxide equivalents. They're not the actual phosphorus and potassium, but in scientific literature, we have to do that. So this is I don't know what this number, it might be the 10-6-4. Yeah. So it'd be the 10-6-4 up here. So, it's a 10-6-4, even though literature says these digits. 30% organic nitrogen. They're right there. He says 10-6-4 oxide basis. Okay, according to the scheduled listing in Table 2. So we're going to skip to the Table 2 and explain what they did, if I can get this on the screen without screwing things up. Sometimes it's hard for me to get these on the screen. Okay, so Table 2. So you apply the 10-6-4 at different dates and at different rates. So let's talk, and I'm going to have to refer back to this because he refers to the treatments as T1s and T2s. So we're going to end up going back to this quite a bit. Treatment 1 was applied in May, and this 0.5 kilograms per R. Remember, at 1 kilogram per 2R is 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. So that sounded confusing. So a half a kilogram per R is a quarter pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So 1 kilogram per R is a half a pound. 0.5 kilograms per R is a quarter pound. It's extremely confusing. So I'm going to try to stay with it. So that quarter pound right here, the 0.5 kilograms, so that's a quarter pound per 1,000, was applied in May for treatment 1, was applied in August for treatment 2, was applied in November for treatment 3. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay. Then the treatment 5 was applied in May and August at a quarter pound each. Okay. I know, like I said at the beginning, it's a little disjointed. It's a little confusing sometimes. There's a lot in here. Treatment 6 was applied in November at a half a pound of N. Treatment 7 was applied in May, August, and November at a quarter pound per. So 3/4 of a pound of N total. All right. So, and then the treatment 8 was a 3/4 of a pound of N applied a quarter in September and a half in November. So we got some spring applications of nitrogen. We have fall applications in November, and then we have a T8 is September and November, which is all fall. We have it's just, there's a lot going on here. I'm not sure of the rationale behind here's the 1 pound per 1,000 square feet equals half. Yeah. So, he has it. Rates were applied at 1 pound, but these are equivalent to 1 pound equals a half a kilogram per hour. Well, hang on a second. Maybe I'm confused because I just looked up. Okay, so I'm sorry. Wow, I just confused everybody, including myself. 1 pound per 1,000 square feet equals 1 kilogram per 200. So if this was 1 kilogram per 100. Okay. Yeah, so I was wrong. That would be 2. Okay, so I apologize for that. I just confused everybody, including myself. So let me back up. Okay, I'm sorry. The 0.5 kilograms is 1 pound per hour, or 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. I'm really sorry. I screwed all that up. So he's applying 1 pound in May, 1 pound in August, 1 pound in November. Then he's applying 2 pounds in May or 2 pounds in November and so forth. I'm sorry. Good grief. This thing is screwing me up. I don't know why. I don't know if they did this to try to make it easier to understand or what, but this R unit was very common back then, the 60s and 70s, and it completely throws me off every time. I'm used to kilograms per hectare, and this kilograms per R is confusing to me. So that's 1 pound, 1 pound, 1 pound, 2 pounds. So he's applying everything in 1 pound or 2 pound increments, basically. So, okay. So hopefully that's clear. Half a kilogram per R is 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, not a half a pound per 1,000 square feet. I'm sorry. May, August, November, that's going to be a total of 3 pounds. September, November, that's going to be a total of 3 pounds. Okay. I'm human, and this unit is really confusing to me. Okay, now that we're all completely clear as mud, I will continue. So that's the schedule, the fertilizer, the complete fertilizer application. He's applying 1 pound in May, 1 pound in August, or 1 pound in November. He's applying 2 pounds in November. He's applying 1 pound in May, and he's all these different fertilizer regimes he's got going on. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is do experiment 1, and then I'm going to come back to experiment 2 because it's confusing. Okay. So that's what they did in experiment 1. Let me go over the results of experiment 1, and then I'm going to come back to experiment 2, which is the nitrogen source component of it. Okay. Experiment 1. Oh, good grief. This thing is difficult to move today. So we're applying the same fertilizer, we're just applying at different rates in different months. The average turf quality rating increased with N intensity. So the more N you applied, the more response you got. But the time of application had no significant effect. Okay, remember we're applying this to where's the grass? We're applying it to a mixed stand. Okay, so yeah, so this was the mixed stand. So they're applying this nitrogen application regime to these turf grasses. Bluegrass, he has a mix of bluegrass and fescue. He has a mix bluegrass, fescue, and bent. So we have bluegrasses and fescues and bents all mixed together. So that's what he's talking about when you're talking about turf response. And he says but the timing of application had no significant effect on turf quality. So all those different timings and early, the spring and the summer and the fall and this and that, it had no effect on the turf grass quality. The only thing it had an effect on was the amount of nitrogen that was applied. I'm not going to talk about the coefficient variation. That's a little bit too much for what we need. Let's get through the next. So turf quality scores for the 3 seasons, clipping weights for 2 seasons, influenced by somehow. I think yeah. Well, that may just be all we end up doing on experiment 1. Let's see if I get onto experiment. There's experiment 2. So let me go ahead and go through experiment 1. My wife's calling me. Okay, so with turf quality scoring system used at Rhode Island, acceptable turf quality was rated at 6.5 or higher. So anything 6.5 or higher was acceptable, it was acceptable. Seasonal means for 67 and 68 of the two lower N rates remained below this level, but reached it in 69 and with the 1 kilogram per hour, which is 2 pound rate. Overall, turf growing conditions were improved in 69, but the data also indicate that turf under conditions similar to those in this experiment can be held near acceptable quality with 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. Quality and top growth are most uniform with late fall, November applications. So basically what he's saying is that the low rate was unacceptable for a short period, but then became acceptable. And the 2 pound, the 2 pound application rate in the fall was what they're essentially recommending. Okay, so here's some rationale. Fertilizer treatments with the 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet applied in May, August, and November, or the 1 pound applied in September and 2 pounds applied in November represent normally suggested rates for lawn and golf fairway turf. So that's why they chose that right here. 3 evenly spaced treatments, the 1 pound in April, August, and November, were compared with 1 pound in September plus 2 pounds in November. In all 3 years, the average turf quality values did not differ. But in 2 test seasons, the average clipping weight values for treatments applied in September and November were significantly less than when treatments were applied in May, August, November. So what he's saying is real simple, is this is consistent with what we found in the past, is that they're applying 1 pound sort of throughout the year, one application, a total of 3, or 1 pound in September and 2 pounds in November. And they're saying the turf quality was the same regardless of how you applied the nitrogen, but the clipping weights, the growth rate of what the turf was greater when the nitrogen was spread out over the year rather than applied late in the fall, which is consistent with what we even talked about yesterday, where you just don't get the growth rate from those late fall applications of nitrogen, but you will get the quality. Okay. That's essentially the take-home message from the experiment 1 that they did. Okay. Pretty straightforward. They have a photo here on this photo here on the right. If you're watching, the effect of late fall nitrogen at 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet on early green up of Kentucky bluegrass and redfish commission. So you can see the green up here from that 2 pound application in November, and you can definitely see why people would want to tend to apply those late fall. Because even in a black and white picture, you can see the difference between that plot and the next plot. I'd like to know how he got it that tight. I don't know if he did it with a drop spreader or not, but keep in mind is that we're going to go over work that shows that that's a similar response to what you see here from a late fall 2 pound application can be achieved with an early spring nitrogen application as well. You don't need to have it sit there all winter and then have it come up in the fall. Okay, you can just not apply the thing in the fall, or apply a very, very low rate of nitrogen in the fall, and then apply a reasonable rate of nitrogen in the spring and achieve that same response and greatly reduce your environmental risk and reduce the chance of financial losses if the customer chooses to leave you after you've applied that late fall nitrogen application. I've completely basically screwed that whole thing up with all those rates. I feel bad that I messed those rates up on the beginning of this, but I'm live. What are you going to do? Okay, let's go to experiment 2. Okay, so basically the take-home message of experiment 1. Let's see if they did a conclusion of experiment 1. No, they didn't. The conclusion of maybe this isn't the last paragraph. Yeah, so basically the conclusion is what we've seen before, is that the application dates didn't really matter in terms of quality. What it did affect was the clipping weights. The late fall applications didn't have the same clipping weights as the nitrogen applied throughout the year, but they all resulted in an acceptable turf quality. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Okay, let's go to experiment 2, because this is where I'm going to start moving into the nitrogen source. This is one of the first papers where I'm going to start moving into different nitrogen sources. In tomorrow's paper, we're going to talk more about much more about the different nitrogen sources. The Turfgrasses' response to different nitrogen sources in the fall. So experiment 2 In spring 1966, a randomized complete block design was initiated in this silt loam of mature Kentucky bluegrass. Urea formaldehyde and ammonium nitrate were compared at equal nitrogen rates per year according to the application schedule in Table 3. Okay, so let's see if I can get through this without screwing this up. All right, let's get to it. All right, so the nitrogen application schedule, if I can get it on the screen. Okay, there it is. Okay, so treatment 1, 2, 3, and 4 were all from ammonium nitrate. Okay, treatment 5, 6, 7, treatment 5, 6, 7, and 8 were all from urea formaldehyde, and then treatment 9 was the control. And we're applying these all at the same rates and all at the same dates. So he did in April and in August, 2 pounds in April, 1 pound in August of both of these. He flipped it around and said 1 pound in September, 2 pounds in November, and then he did 1 and 1 and 1 in April, August, and November. And then he did a September and November. He flipped the nitrogen rates from 1 pound in September to 2 pounds in September, and from 2 pounds in November to 1 pound in November. It's just there's a lot. I warned you guys at the beginning. This is a kind of a disjointed paper. It's a lot going on. It's not easy to kind of keep track of sometimes. Okay, so what we're going to find is what happens from a soluble nitrogen source compared to a slow release nitrogen source applied at probably might be a little high on the, well, no, it's fine. It might be a little high on the soluble end. I don't know if we'd really recommend applying 2 pounds of nitrogen now as soluble nitrogen in the fall, in the late fall here in November. Might be a tad bit high, but they're all equal in terms of the nitrogen that was applied. We're going to see what happens in terms of the turf response to these two nitrogen sources. Harper Explorers, howdy. How are you? Good to see you in the chat. You're picking up what I'm putting down, Western Mass Turf. Okay, appreciate it. Okay, let's go to the results of experiment 2, which are right here. Data for urea formaldehyde treatment, the T5 and T8, were omitted. So this is basically the whole thing right here. Okay. So all as confusing as I made the first part of the paper, this is much clearer. Remember, we have ammonium nitrate and we have urea formaldehyde applied at different rates, different timings, but they're all the same, for the different sources. Okay. And right out the gate, the second or third sentence in the experiment 2 results are this: data for urea formaldehyde treatments 5 through treatment 8 were omitted because the 3 pound of nitrogen treatment level was insufficient for satisfactory turf production. I have a colleague or a past colleague that runs a tremendously large lawn care company. Granted, it's in a different state. It's not in Rhode Island. That is dead set on using UF as their slow release source. There's nothing I can do to change his mind. Regardless of the cost that I show him, regardless of the cost of turf response that I show him from, let's say, sulfur coat urea being the least expensive slow release, it doesn't matter. He is dead set on using UF, and for whatever length of time, I can't get him to change from using UF. And time after time after time, we see UF fail to result in sufficient turf grass, or I shouldn't say fail to result in this. You can get sufficient turf grass from UF, but under similar conditions, you don't see university. You don't see urea formaldehyde generally compared to the turf results as you get from other slow releasing sources or soluble nitrogen sources. It's just either too cold, or, whatever the case is, it just doesn't tend to result in a similar turf quality. Now, can you make it result? Sure, there's a way you can do it. I mean, sure, you can add a little soluble into it to give a little kicker at the beginning, or you can apply a little higher rates to get the cold water soluble nitrogen from UF up there a little higher. I mean, there's things you can do. But at the end of the day, the cost to use that product is much more expensive than some of the other products, which I'll eventually go into. And, we generally find that the turf grass tends to look better using other end sources in many cases, not in every case. And in this case right here, they just omitted it completely. They said it didn't do anything. It was completely unacceptable. The turf grass was unacceptable to the point where they just left it all out. They omitted the whole data set, which I just actually disagree with omitting it. You should still leave it in to show people that it didn't do anything. It didn't result in whatever you were looking for. The turf quality was insufficient. The turf looked horrible. Well, just because it did that, you should still include the data. You shouldn't omit it. Back then, there was a lot more publication bias than there is now, where publication bias is getting better, but unfortunately, it's kind of looked down upon to publish data results that didn't happen. You didn't see anything happen, so you can't publish it. Well, that's still a result. You should still be allowed to publish that. I mean, we need to know if it didn't do anything. And imagine if they're doing human trials on a drug, and the drug is, let's say it's a competitor to, some, I don't know, Tylenol or something, and the drug didn't do anything. Well, and it didn't do anything, so we left it out. Well, still show it. I mean, people still want to know what the numbers were. You're going to put it in your body if it didn't do anything. Anyway, the point is that they left it out. I just think it's funny that people write that in these scientific articles. You didn't do anything, so we just omitted it. Can you imagine setting all that study up? All those how many treatments they have? So they had 4 treatments, and they had 4 or 5 different months that they had to keep track of to go out and put that out. I don't know how many reps they had. Probably at least 3. Probably maybe as many as 4 reps. Did they do this over multiple years? I don't know if they did. I have to go back and look. But I mean, it's a lot of work. They got to weigh all those treatments out. They got to do all those ratings. They got to, do all the clipping management and all that stuff. And then, nothing happened. It's disappointing, or can be discouraging when you have that and then nothing happens. I just think it's funny. It's a shame when I'm not knocking any end source. Turfgrass can be achieved. Turf quality can be achieved with any end source. But you got to know what you're dealing with. To apply a UF in Rhode Island when it's freezing outside in November, I'm assuming it's freezing in November, probably not a good idea. Okay. Let's continue. Average annual turf quality ratings remain below the acceptable 6.5 level and declined from 5.7 to 4.8 and to 4.5. Growth expressed as clipping yield also declined with time. So this is all they have to say about urea formaldehyde. So it started at a 5.7, and it ended at a 4.5 2 years later. I guess, so I guess they did it 3 years later. So it just kept going down. So these, and I'm not saying this, I can show you data where the opposite occurs with urea formaldehyde. But oftentimes I've heard the argument, urea formaldehyde is going to stay in the soil. There's cold water soluble, there's hot water soluble, and there's hot water insoluble is generally how the nitrogen in that product will be shown sometimes. And the cold water soluble is immediately available or soluble. And the hot water soluble would be, the idea is that it would be released throughout some reasonable time frame, growing season. And then there's hot water insoluble that at some point would be broken down, but it hasn't broken down yet. It's going to be a very, very long time. And they had the idea is that, you can apply it for multiple years, and over time, the part that didn't get broken down the first year will eventually get broken down, which is maybe true. It may go off site. It may migrate off site. I have no idea what happens to it, but over 4 or 5 years, you'll build up your reserve in the soil, and then you wouldn't have to fertilize. I don't know anybody that's actually done that in practice, but I do know there's a golf course that actually tested that, and they actually did see some residual turf response from prior years of UF application. And then they didn't apply anything the next year, and they did still have some turf quality response after that. But The argument's pretty weak. You won't find it in the literature very much. I don't know if you'll ever find it in the literature, in the scientific literature, that, you know, there's a buildup of reserve. Here you see 3 years of application, and it's going down and down and down. Applying 3 pounds of nitrogen from urea formaldehyde each year, and each year it went down. So it apparently takes more than 3 years for it to break down, for enough to break down so that it have some turf response to it if it's been building up in the soil. So I just think that's cute. You know, when they write stuff so succinctly, I like that. So let's continue. Consistently desirable results were recorded from T2 in all 3 seasons. Okay, let's go up and look at T2 again. T2 was the September plus November 1 pound and 2 pounds. 1 pound in September, 2 pounds in November from ammonium nitrate. So consistently desirable results were recorded from T2. Real simple. So ammonium nitrate applied in September and November gave consistent results. Okay. A comparison, I didn't highlight this, but I'm going to read about it. A comparison of that treatment, the November and the September and November application of T2 with T4. So we got 1 pound plus 2 pounds, 1 pound in September, 2 pounds in November, versus 2 pounds in September and 1 pound in November. Okay, so we're just switching them. The comparison of those 2 treatments indicate that results are not as uniform and did not provide the early spring turf quality obtained from T2, while fall clipping weights were excessive. So what this is saying right here is that applying 2 pounds in September resulted in excessive growth and did not result in the spring green up as the 1 pound in September and 2 pounds in November. Okay. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what we've been talking about in many of these publications. Let's get through the rest of the highlighted section. Now, before we do that, and remember yesterday, Dr. Soldat's talking about what he did in his study, where these heavy soluble applications late in the fall are probably not what you want to be doing. You want to be doing, reducing the rate as it gets colder and colder and colder. Remember, this is Rhode Island. I don't know the conditions under Rhode Island. Maybe it's still a little bit warmer in that area. I don't know Rhode Island's temperature. I don't even know if they put it in this presentation. At least if they even put it in here. No, they didn't put the temperatures and stuff in here. So you don't take these results and say, well, Dr. Soldat said don't apply a heavy soluble nitrogen in late fall, and this one's saying it's probably better to apply the nitrogen a little heavier in the late fall than in the early fall, because these are 2 different scenarios, 2 different conditions. Okay. Natural and synthetic organic nitrogen sources are recommended alone and in various combinations with soluble nitrogen to reduce excessive growth and obtain long-lasting results. Results reported here indicate that similar responses can be obtained using soluble N alone or in combination with 30% organic if they're made in the fall. So whenever you see, I've been hitting at this for the last several papers, whenever you see recommendations, we really should be applying probably soluble in the fall rather than slow release in the fall. It's not because one paper found it, okay? It's because numerous papers have shown that same result under numerous different environmental conditions, okay? So these, heavy fall applications of polymer-coated ureas and, whatever the case is, reacted ureas or organic nitrogen sources, it's not that those won't result in something in some cases. In some cases, they probably will result in some turf response under some conditions. But the soluble N sources have consistently shown a response in a number of different conditions. Okay. The goal is to have a product that is acceptable, the turfgrass, and to get that product, we need the nitrogen in the plant. Okay, having it sitting there in the soil, not being taken up by the plant, is not our goal. We want it to be taken up and used, and ultimately result in a content customer, or content golfers, or content football players, or whatever the case is. Now, again, we're talking about fall applications of nitrogen. It's not any other time right now. Spring and summer applications on warm season grasses are different. Okay, September nitrogen provides for longer fall color, and late November treatment triggers early spring development without increased mowing requirements. So if you want your customer to have a little greener grass, if you're doing both, if you're applying nitrogen and you're mowing, and you don't want to be collecting clippings and piling up clippings and leaving clippings all over the place, don't apply a lot of heavy nitrogen in the late fall, is what this is saying. Apply a little bit of nitrogen, not a lot, and you should be fine. Under Rhode Island conditions, so this is the only way I knew it was from Rhode Island, because in the conclusions it says that. I didn't see that anywhere else in the paper, which is peculiar. Red fescue and Kentucky bluegrass did not suffer winter injury during 3 years of testing. So now this is refutes, or it contrasts with the Carroll papers that showed, fall applications or soluble nitrogen applications result in reduction in winter hardiness, increases in winter death, winter kill, because they were doing it sort of in freeze chambers. Whereas when we go out here and we look in the field, Powell saw the same thing. He didn't see a risk to winter injury or death. Here's another paper from, again, Ledeboer, I think is how you say the name, where they did not suffer winter injury during the 3 years of testing, and they're applying 3 pounds of nitrogen at various times. So they didn't see it, and they're dealing with red fescues and Kentucky bluegrasses, whereas Powell was dealing with bent grasses and fescues. So we have 3 or 4 different grasses in a couple different locations using a fairly high nitrogen rate, soluble and slow. And we just don't see the winter death and winter kill as what was priorly anticipated or predicted to occur using freeze chamber studies. If hydration was increased as reported by Beard, and this is this reference right on here by Dr. Beard, it says winter injury golf course. This is a reference here. I haven't read that, but apparently he reported some hydration issues. If hydration was increased as reported by Beard, it was not to the point of causing cell destruction during cold weather. Top growth that occurs as a result of late November nitrogen applications is mainly in form of new tillers and remains compact until spring. So they're saying that the nitrogen that they applied in late November did not result in excess clippings. It resulted in excess tillering, which is what you see here in this photograph. I didn't really go into that, but let me zoom in on this photograph if I can get it on the screen. Probably can't. So this photograph here is the effect of 2 pounds of nitrogen in late fall on Marion Kentucky bluegrass tillering in March on the right, compared to an equal spring and summer fertilization. So I'm assuming what they're talking about is this right here is the spring and summer application of nitrogen, and this is the late fall application, 2 pounds of nitrogen in November. And you can see that the excess, if you want to call it photosynthesis or the growth, didn't occur in terms of clipping weights. It occurred in terms of excess tillering. You can see a couple little stolons or whatever these are. I guess they're calling these tillers, where you can see a whole bunch coming up from the crown on this one. Okay, so that's what they're asserting, is that the nitrogen from the late fall application, the November application, 2 pounds in November, that did not result in clipping weight excess clipping weights, resulted in excess new or increased tillering, new tillering, but it remained compact. Whether that's true or not, it'd be up from someone else. I haven't seen much data on that, but that's what they're saying. Cell division appears to be triggered by nitrogen, while normal cell elongation is inhibited, possibly by short photoperiods. And they just put a citation here. So this is how Kentucky bluegrass grows, and this citation right here is what they're talking about. In a I'm not a fan of doing this in conclusions, because they're postulating what may occur in a conclusion of a scientific paper. It is what it is, but they're postulating that the cell division appears to be triggered by nitrogen, while cell elongation is inhibited, possibly. So again, they're trying to explain, this should be in the discussion, not the conclusion, but they're trying to explain why you would have excess tillering, but not excess growth. So they're saying that division might occur, but elongation doesn't occur. Whether or not that's true, I would be skeptical on that until I knew I had more information. When soluble nitrogen was applied to frozen soil later during winter, stimulation of new tillers did not occur, and there was no visual evidence that nitrogen was metabolized. So I had a question out here by my neighbor the other day. Can I go ahead and apply nitrogen? It was 2 days ago, October 15th, and I told him, we really don't recommend applying nitrogen too much after this date. October 15th is sort of the last time we really recommend applying any significant amount of nitrogen here in Lexington on tall fescue. And there's several reasons for that, but this is, supports that, is that the colder and colder you get, the less likely you're going to have that the nitrogen is actually going to enter the plant. When the ground is frozen, to go out and apply something, nitrogen to frozen soil is not a wise management decision, to say the least. There's very little chance that that's ever going to get into the turf. I would say almost zero chance. And there's a great deal of risk of offsite movement. And that's what they concluded in this, is that soluble N applied to frozen soil did not do anything. The nitrogen, there was no evidence that the nitrogen was even metabolized at all when that nitrogen was applied to frozen soil. Okay, so I kind of screwed that paper up. I mean, you got to give me a little bit of leeway. I mean, you're going to do so many of these live, I'm going to screw one up. I definitely screwed that one up. But it does support what we've been building on from prior work as well, from Powell's study as well, is that, be careful applying heavy amounts of soluble nitrogen late into the fall. If you have an option, ammonium sulfate, you don't have ammonium nitrate too much nowadays, but ammonium sulfate, urea, soluble nitrogen sources are probably going to be your best option in the fall and later in the fall than the slower release nitrogen sources. Okay. That's basically what the take-home message. Tomorrow at 10, we're going to have an author come on who has a much more robust study and much clearer study on nitrogen sources and rates. So the environmental conditions change. So in his study in Western Washington State near Seattle, where it's a little warmer, the critical date for application can be extended a little later into November. And maybe, I think his dates were in November, whereas on the eastern side of Washington State, where it's colder, that critical date for the last application is much earlier. And but the nitrogen sources that were applied at both of those locations, we're going to find something very similar, where the soluble N sources tended to outperform the slow release N sources, even though the slow release N sources did provide some beneficial response in that study tomorrow. So tomorrow, 10 a.m., we're going to have another author on, and we're going to discuss nitrogen rates and nitrogen sources applied to cool season grasses in Washington State. Okay. Let me just check the chat real quick before I sign off. What? Lush, I'm trying to... Oh, in Discord. Oh, okay. Tagged me in a picture of soil temperatures in Kings. Okay, I'll take a look at it in Discord. Gray Fox, looks like you have a question. Isn't it more likely that a heavy application of NPK in late fall will likely leach out rather than stay in the soil until spring? Well, the key word in your question is likely. Yes, it is more likely. We're going to eventually get into the environmental fate of these applications. The author coming on tomorrow has another paper that we won't talk about tomorrow, where he, I believe it was N15 labeled, looked at the fate of the nitrogen applied to these grasses under his conditions. So the likelihood of offsite movement is probably fairly low. In an established turf stand, it's probably fairly low in most cases. I'm familiar with Florida soils where we have a tremendous amount of sand, where we can get some movement. But it is still there. It's a non-zero number is the likelihood. It is above zero is the chance of leaching beyond the root zone, or runoff, or volatilization, or some other offsite movement of the nitrogen that was applied, versus waiting and applying it in the spring. Like I said yesterday, you have zero chance of offsite movement when you don't apply it. Okay. You can still get a similar turf response by applying a little bit in the fall and then waiting and applying a little bit more in the spring, as opposed to applying everything in the fall. You can still get a very similar turf response by splitting it up, and you have a great deal of reduction in the risk of offsite movement. Okay. But when it comes to leaching, that's sort of what I used to do for a lot of work is nitrogen leaching, some phosphorus leaching. And there's a lot to it. Okay. I will say this, is that actively growing turf grass, it is very difficult to get nutrients to move through that actively grown turf grass. You can have whatever position you have on it. I can show many publications that show actively growing turf grass has such a drive and capacity to uptake nitrogen or phosphorus and potassium that you have to do some really crazy things to get the nitrogen to move through that turf grass. Okay, you have to get a lot of high soluble in, you have to get a lot of rainfall, you have to have thin turf, or it has to be not growing. I mean, you have to do some really crazy stuff, but it can happen. So is it likelihood greater? Yeah, it's probably greater, but in the grand scheme of things, the chances of offsite movement are probably pretty low. Okay, probably pretty low. Okay, guys, I'm gonna sign off for today. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., we have a past professor coming on to talk about his paper. Look forward to that. Until then, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.